The auctioneer's voice carried across the dusty lot like a man trying to sell the unsellable. April sun hung low over Dawson County, Nebraska, casting long shadows between the rows of farm equipment lined up like prisoners waiting for judgment. Tractors, combines, hay balers, most of them respectable machines that would fetch respectable prices. And then at the far end, separated from everything else like it carried something contagious, sat a 1948 Farmall M with the word junk scratched into its hood. Anna Louise Brennan stood at the back of the crowd, 22 years old and invisible. Her flannel shirt had been her father's, once washed so many times the blue had faded to something closer to gray. Jeans worn thin at the knees, boots that had been resoled twice using a kit she'd ordered from a catalog. She kept her hands in her pockets because they wanted to shake, and she couldn't afford to look weak. Not here. Not in front of these men. The whispers started before the auctioneer even got to the Farmall. A woman at an equipment auction. Alone. Where's her husband? Poor Helen. That daughter of hers won't listen to anyone. Every word landed like a stone. Anna had been hearing variations for 5 months now, ever since her father's funeral. Thomas Brennan had died in November 1968 with his hand on a plow and his heart giving out mid-furrow, and the whole county had decided his daughter couldn't possibly manage what he'd left behind. 80 acres of bottomland along the Platte River, a barn that needed new shingles, a house where her mother sat by the window and worried herself sick. The auctioneer moved through the lot with the efficiency of a man who knew his business. A 1965 John Deere 4020 went for $3,200. A nearly new hay baler brought in $1,800. Every sale felt like watching someone else's future get decided in 30-second increments. Anna kept her eyes on the Farmall at the end of the road, the tractor that everyone had already dismissed. She knew that machine. Everyone in the county over 40 knew it. It had belonged to Thomas Brennan's best friend, a quiet man named Clarence Hollister, who'd farmed north of town until he died in 1952. The tractor had sat in a barn for 17 years, while Hollister's widow lived in California, and the estate got tangled up in paperwork nobody wanted to touch. Now the barn was empty, and the widow was dead, and everything was finally getting sold, including a tractor that hadn't run since Truman was president. The auctioneer reached the Farmall, and his voice lost some of its polish. "All right, folks, last item of the day, 1948 Farmall M. Sold as is, and I mean that. This one's from the Hollister estate. Been sitting in a barn since '52. Probably good for parts, maybe." Silence spread across the crowd. Men shifted weight from one foot to the other. Someone coughed. The tractor sat there with its faded red paint and flat tires and bird nests in the air cleaner, looking like the mechanical equivalent of a dog that had learned not to ask to be let inside. Anna's hand went up. The auctioneer blinked, squinting against the afternoon glare. "I have 50. Do I hear 60 nothing?" Men turned to look at her now, and the whispers got louder. "What's she doing? Does she even know how to drive a tractor?" "Poor thing's confused." Anna's voice came out steady, which surprised her. She'd practiced this in her head for 3 days. 75. The crowd went from whispers to laughter. She'd just bid against herself. Nobody did that unless they were desperate or stupid or both. The auctioneer looked like he wanted to ask if she was sure, but he'd been in the business too long to question money. "Sold to the young lady in the back for $75. The laughter followed Anna all the way to the payment table. She counted out the bills in small denominations, mostly 5s and 1s, a few 10s, and the clerk counted them back with the kind of patience usually reserved for children. The money smelled like the tin box under her bed where she'd been saving since Christmas. That's when she felt someone step up beside her close enough that she could smell aftershave and new rubber. Richard Garrett owned the John Deere dealership in Lexington. Big man in a clean shirt, hands that had never pulled a wrench, and anger face that wore confidence like most people wore skin. He'd sold more tractors than anyone in 3 counties and had opinions about everything, especially about people who bought equipment without consulting him first. Anna Brennan. His voice had that quality some men develop when they've spent too long being right about things. I heard you just spent $75 on that Hollister pile of rust. Anna took her receipt and folded it carefully before answering. Yes, sir. Garrett gestured toward the parking lot where his dealership truck sat gleaming in the afternoon light. You know what $75 could have bought you? That's a down payment on a real tractor. A John Deere, something that actually runs. I can fix this one. The laugh came quick and loud, the kind designed to carry. Other men turned to watch. Anna felt her face getting warm. Garrett stepped closer, lowering his voice to something that probably sounded fatherly in his own head, but came out patronizing. Fix it. Honey, that tractor hasn't run since before you were born. The engine's probably seized solid. The transmission's full of mice. You'd need $1,000 in parts and a year of Sundays just to get it to cough. You need your daddy to look at that first, or maybe wait until you find yourself a husband who knows his way around machinery. My daddy's dead, Mr. Garrett, and I don't have a husband. The words hung there for a moment. Garrett's face went through a few changes, surprise, then something that might have been embarrassment, then settling on the kind of pity Anna had learned to hate over the past 5 months. Well, I'm sorry for your loss, truly. But that just proves my point, doesn't it? You're a young woman on your own. You've got no business trying to farm. Your daddy was a good man. God rest him, but you're 22 years old. You need to be practical. Anna looked at this man in his clean shirt and his soft hands and his absolute certainty that he knew what she needed better than she did. Gravel crunched under her boots as she shifted weight. My daddy taught me something, Mr. Garrett. He said the worst thing a person can do is let other people tell them what's possible. She walked past him toward the borrowed flatbed trailer she'd parked at the edge of the lot. Behind her, Garrett stood there with his mouth open. Then the laughter started again, spreading through the crowd like fire through dry grass. Let her try. Give her a month. She'll be begging someone to take that junk off her hands. 4 men helped push the farmall onto the trailer because the wheels wouldn't turn and the steering was locked solid. They did it without speaking to her directly, addressing their comments to each other like she was a piece of equipment that needed moving instead of a person who'd asked for help. Watch your back with this one. Thing weighs more than it looks. Probably drop an axle before she gets it home. Anna thanked them anyway. They nodded and walked away without meeting her eyes. The drive back to the Brennan farm took 20 minutes through countryside she'd known her whole life. Fields stretched to the horizon on both sides of the road, some already showing the first green shoots of spring corn. The Platte River wound through the landscape like a thread of silver, and she could pick out individual farms by their buildings, the Johnsons with their new metal barn, the Mitchells with their 3 silos, the O'Brien place with its distinctive red windmill. Her own farm looked smaller every time she came back to it. The house needed paint. The barn needed everything. 80 acres sounded like a lot until you stood in the middle of it and realized how much ground a person had to cover just to break even. Helen Brennan was waiting on the porch when Anna pulled up. 44 years old and looking older every day. Blonde hair going gray at the temples. Hands that wouldn't stop moving, smoothing her apron, touching her face, wringing themselves like they were trying to find something to hold on to. The tractor sat on the trailer like an accusation. Helen's voice came out thin. Anna, tell me you didn't. Anna killed the engine and climbed down from the truck cab. The metal door groaned, the sound carrying across the yard. It was $75, Mama. That's all we could afford. That's all the money your father left. Not all of it. There's still a little in the account. Helen came down the porch steps, moving like someone walking toward a car accident. That money was supposed to last us until you found work. Until we figured things out. I did figure things out. We're going to farm. Anna, honey, look at me. Anna looked. She saw her mother's face lined with worry and grief, saw the exhaustion in her eyes, saw the fear that had been growing there since November. The wind picked up, carrying the smell of turned earth from neighboring fields. We can't farm. You can't farm. It's not. Women don't do this. Maggie O'Brien does. Maggie's different. She's older. She was married to a farmer for 20 years before he died. She knows things. Then I'll learn. Helen's hand went to her forehead, that gesture she'd developed in the months since Thomas died, like she was trying to physically hold her thoughts together. People are talking, Anna. They're saying terrible things. They're saying you're being stubborn and foolish and that you're throwing your life away. Mrs. Patterson at church asked me why I let you do this, like I have any control over you anymore. What do you want me to do? Mama? The question came out harder than Anna meant it to. Helen flinched. I want you to be practical. Sell the land, move to town, find a teaching position or work at the library, or find a nice young man and settle down. The Wilson boy has been asking about you. Bobby Wilson can barely string 3 words together. He'd take care of you. I don't need taking care of. Helen's eyes filled and she turned away, looking out toward the fields their family had worked for 2 generations. A crow called from somewhere in the distance. Your father wouldn't want this for you. The words hit like a physical thing. Anna felt her own eyes stinging and blinked hard. Daddy taught me to drive that Super M when I was 14. He taught me to check oil and grease fittings and read pressure gauges. He taught me that land is the only thing that matters because they're not making any more of it. You think he'd want me to give this up to let some dealer buy it cheap and turn it into someone else's farm? Helen turned back and her voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. I think he'd want you to be safe and happy and to have a life that isn't killing yourself trying to prove something to people who will never respect you, no matter what you do. Then I guess we want different things. Anna walked toward the barn before her mother could say anything else. She heard Helen's footsteps going back up the porch, heard the screen door slam, heard the sound of crying through the kitchen window. Each sound landed like a stone in her chest. The barn smelled like old wood and machine oil and memories. Thomas Brennan had spent more time here than in the house some years, and his tools still hung on the wall in the exact arrangement he'd preferred. Wrenches sorted by size, hammers grouped by weight, coffee cans full of bolts and washers and nuts labeled in his careful handwriting. Dust motes drifted through slants of afternoon light. Anna stood there in the dimness and felt the weight of what she'd done settling on her shoulders. $75, the last of the money. A tractor that hadn't run in 17 years. A mother who thought she was crazy. A county full of people waiting to say they'd told her so. Her father's voice came back to her across 5 months of silence. She could hear it as clearly as if he were standing right there, smell the tobacco he used to chew, see the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. Annie girl, this land is yours too. Don't let anyone tell you different. He'd said it on her 16th birthday, standing in this exact spot showing her how to rebuild a carburetor. She'd gotten grease on her new dress and her mother had been furious, but Thomas had just laughed and told her that good farmers wore their work. The memory hurt. Everything hurt. But Anna had learned over the past 5 months that hurt was just another thing you worked through. She needed help getting the tractor off the trailer. That much was obvious. 4 men had barely managed to push it on, and she'd break her back trying to move it alone, which meant swallowing her pride and asking neighbors for help, which meant more looks and more whispers and more men talking to each other instead of to her. The sound of a truck engine cut through her thoughts. Not the rattling diesel of a farm truck, but something smoother. Anna walked to the barn door and saw a green Ford pickup pulling into the yard, late 60s model, with one fender a different color than the rest. Margaret O'Brien climbed out of the cab like she owned the place. 45 years old and weathered by sun and work-red hair going to copper-gray hands that looked like they could pull a wrench or a calf with equal efficiency. She'd been farming alone since her husband died of cancer 6 years ago, 45 acres south of town, and she had a reputation for being tougher than most men and smarter than all of them. Heard you bought the Hollister tractor? Maggie's voice carried across the yard without shouting. Anna stepped out of the barn, squinting against the slant of sun. News travels fast. Equipment auction in Dawson County. You might as well take out an ad in the paper. Maggie walked closer, looking at the farmall on the trailer. especially when a young woman bids against herself for a piece of junk that hasn't run since Eisenhower. I know it hasn't run. That's why it was cheap. Maggie circled the trailer, examining the tractor from every angle. She touched the hood where someone had scratched junk, ran her hand along the faded paint, kicked one of the flat tires. The rubber cracked under her boot. You know what you're looking at here? A 1948 Farmall M that needs work. That's one way to put it. Another way would be a completely seized engine, a transmission full of rust and mouse nests wiring that's probably disintegrated, hydraulics that haven't moved in 17 years, and a radiator that'll leak from 6 different places once you get coolant in it. Maggie looked up and her eyes were sharp. You got the skills to fix all that? No. You got the money to pay someone who does? No. Then what exactly is your plan? Learn. The word hung in the spring air between them. Maggie studied her for a long moment. Anna stood there trying not to look as terrified as she felt. Then Maggie's face cracked into something that might have been a smile. Good answer. Let's get this thing off your trailer before your mother has a complete breakdown. They used Maggie's truck and a system of ropes and wooden planks that Maggie called hillbilly engineering and Anna called terrifying. Inch by inch they coaxed the Farmall down onto solid ground. When the last wheel touched dirt, Anna's shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool air, and her hands burned from rope friction. Maggie wiped her palms on her jeans. Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock, bring a notebook and a pencil. We're going to start with basics. Anna's throat felt tight. Why are you helping me? Maggie looked toward the house where Helen's face had appeared in the kitchen window. Because 23 years ago I married a farmer, and every man in this county told me I didn't know what I was doing. They said I'd ruin Tom's farm, that I'd drive him into debt, that women didn't have the sense God gave a fence post when it came to agriculture. Her voice went harder. Tom and I farmed together for 17 years. When he died, those same men showed up at the funeral and told me I should sell. Said I couldn't possibly manage alone. Said I'd lose everything within a year. What did you do? Told them to go to hell. Farmed anyway. Still farming. Still making a profit. Still getting up every morning and proving them wrong. Maggie headed toward her truck. 6 o'clock, Anna. Don't be late. She was gone before Anna could say thank you, leaving only tire tracks in the gravel and the faint smell of diesel exhaust. That night at dinner, Helen didn't speak. She moved food around her plate and looked at everything except her daughter. The silence felt heavy enough to crush furniture. The kitchen clock ticked. Somewhere outside a dog barked. Finally, when Anna couldn't take it anymore, she set down her fork. Maggie O'Brien's going to teach me. Helen's head came up. Teach you what? How to rebuild the tractor, how to farm, how to make this work. Anna, this is insane. Maybe, but it's what I'm doing. Helen stood up so fast her chair scraped backward. Do you have any idea what people are saying, Mrs.? Patterson told me at church that her husband said you're going to get yourself killed trying to operate machinery you don't understand. Bobby Wilson's mother said it's a shame about Tom's daughter losing her mind with grief. Richard Garrett told half the county you don't know which end of a wrench to hold. Anna felt something hard forming in her chest. And what did you tell them, Mama? Helen's face crumpled. I told them you were grieving, that you'd come to your senses, that this was just a phase. It's not a phase. Then what is it? It's me trying to hold on to the only thing Daddy left us. This land, this farm, this life. We could sell, move to town. I could get work as a seamstress. You could teach. We'd be fine. Fine isn't enough. The words came out harder than Anna meant them. Helen flinched like she'd been slapped. You sound just like him. That same stubborn pride that wouldn't let him rest, that worked him into an early grave. Is that what you want? To die at 53 with your hand on a plow? I want to not give up before I've even tried. Helen turned away, gripping the edge of the sink. Her knuckles went white. Your father tried. He tried so hard. And you know what it got him? Debt. Exhaustion. A heart that gave out while he was still young. She looked back and her face was wet. I loved him more than anything in this world, Anna. But I won't lose you the same way. I won't stand by and watch you kill yourself for dirt. It's not dirt, it's our land. It's not worth your life." The words hung between them like something physical. Anna stood up, her own hands shaking now. "He taught me things, Mama. All those hours in the barn that made you so mad, all that time I should have been learning to cook and sew and be a proper young lady. He was teaching me how to read a gauge, how to time an engine, how to look at a machine and see what it needed." She felt tears on her face but kept talking. "I know you wanted something different for me. I know you wanted me to be like other girls. But I'm not. I'm his daughter. And I can do this." Helen was crying too now, and her voice came out broken. "I'm so afraid, Anna. I'm so afraid you'll fail and lose everything. Or worse, that you'll succeed and spend the rest of your life alone because no man will want a woman who smells like diesel and has grease under her fingernails." "Then I'll be alone." Anna said it quietly, and the certainty in her own voice surprised her. "I'd rather be alone and farming than married to someone who needs me to be small." Helen put her face in her hands and sobbed. Anna wanted to go to her, wanted to put her arms around her mother and tell her it would all be okay. But she couldn't promise that. She didn't know if it would be okay. So she stood there across the kitchen and let her mother cry, feeling the distance between them like a physical ache. Eventually, Helen's sobs quieted. She wiped her face with her apron and spoke without looking up. "6 o'clock is very early." "Yes, ma'am. You'll need breakfast. I can make something." Helen finally looked at her daughter, and something in her face had changed. Not acceptance, not exactly, but maybe the beginning of resignation. "I'll make eggs. You should eat properly if you're going to be doing manual labor." It wasn't much, but it was something. Anna went to bed that night with her father's farm equipment manuals stacked on her nightstand. She'd checked them out from the county library 3 days ago, telling the librarian she was doing research for a school project. The lie had come easily. Everything was easier when you didn't admit the truth. The manuals were old, some dating back to the 1940s. Pages yellowed and dog-eared, diagrams, hand-drawn text, dense and technical. Anna opened one to a chapter on internal combustion engines and started reading by lamplight. Moths batted against the window screen. Cylinder, piston, crankshaft, camshaft, valves, timing, compression. Words that might as well have been a foreign language, but she read them anyway, sounding them out, trying to make her brain understand what her hands would need to know. Outside her window, the farm all sat in the barn like a challenge. Or maybe like a test. She still couldn't tell which. Maggie showed up at 5:50 the next morning, which Anna learned was typical. Early was on time. On time was late. Late was unacceptable. They stood in the barn while dawn broke gray and cool, and Maggie walked around the tractor, speaking in a voice that suggested she'd given this lecture before. "First thing you need to understand is what you're looking at. This is a Farmall M manufactured by International Harvester in 1948. 4-cylinder engine, 36 horsepower, designed for row crop farming. Basic machine. Simple by today's standards, which is why it's teachable." Anna pulled out her notebook. Maggie noticed and nodded approval. "You see that hood? Someone scratched junk on it because that's what it looks like. But junk is just something that's broken, and broken is just something that hasn't been fixed yet." Maggie laid her hand on the engine block. "This hasn't run since 1952. Your father's friend Hollister parked it and never started it again." You know why Anna shook her head. Nobody does. But somebody prepared this for long-term storage. See that oil pan? Anna looked where Maggie was pointing. Someone sealed it. Waterproof compound around the edges, professional work. They wanted this engine protected. From what? From time. From moisture. From everything that destroys metal when it sits. Maggie straightened up. Which tells me something important. Whoever parked this tractor cared about it. They didn't abandon it. They preserved it. But why? That's the question, isn't it? Maggie pulled a wrench from her pocket. Now let's see what we're dealing with. They spent the next 6 hours draining fluids, removing panels, documenting damage. Maggie talked the whole time, explaining things in words Anna could understand. Don't say seized. Say the pistons are stuck to the cylinder walls because the oil degraded and turned to varnish. Don't say broken. Say this specific part failed in this specific way, and here's how you fix it. Anna wrote everything down, fingers cramping around the pencil. Her notebook filled with diagrams and notes and questions to look up later. The barn warmed as the sun climbed higher. Sweat ran down her back. At noon, Maggie stepped back and wiped her hands. You've got about $1,000 in parts here, maybe more. Machine shop work for the cylinders will run $200. New pistons, rings, gaskets, bearings, that's another $300 easy. Transmission rebuild, hydraulics, electrical system, radiator repair. She looked at Anna. You got that kind of money? No. Then you're going to learn to do it yourself, which means you need tools you don't have and skills you haven't learned and patience you haven't developed yet. Anna felt something cold settling in her stomach. How long will it take? Maggie pulled a rag from her back pocket and cleaned her hands with the kind of thoroughness that suggested a lifetime of habit. Professional mechanic with the right equipment. 6 months, maybe a year. You teaching yourself as you go? She paused. 3 years if you're lucky and don't make too many mistakes that you can't undo. 3 years. Anna said it out loud, tasting the shape of the words. The barn suddenly felt smaller. 3 years. Or you could sell it for parts and walk away now. Probably get $50. That's less than I paid. Welcome to farming. Maggie headed for her truck. Tomorrow 6 o'clock. Bring work gloves. We're going to start pulling the engine. She left Anna standing in the barn with an overwhelming sense of what she'd gotten herself into. 3 years. $1,000 in parts. Skills she didn't have. Tools she couldn't afford. A county full of people waiting to watch her fail. The spring sun climbed higher, warming the barn, and Anna looked at the tractor sitting there with its panels removed and its secrets exposed. Rust on the pistons, corrosion in the transmission, cracked rubber hoses, frayed wiring. Her father's voice came back to her clear as morning. Every broken machine is a puzzle waiting to be solved. You just have to find the first piece. Anna picked up her wrench and went back to work. The parts store in Lexington smelled like grease and cardboard and masculine certainty. Anna pushed through the door on a Saturday morning in July 1969, 3 months into the rebuild, with a list written in her father's handwriting. Pistons oversized by .020 inches. Piston rings to match. Wrist pins. She'd memorized the specifications but brought the paper anyway because numbers were easier to trust than memory when you were teaching yourself engineering. The clerk looked up from his magazine, mid-30s wedding ring shirt pocket full of pens. His eyes went from her face to her work boots to her grease-stained hands and back up again. Help you, Miss Anna, put the list on the counter. I need these parts for a Farmall M48 model. The clerk picked up the paper, squinting at the specifications. What's your husband rebuilding? The question landed exactly the way he'd meant it to. Anna felt her jaw tighten. I'm rebuilding it. The clerk's face rearranged itself into something that was probably meant to be a smile but came out condescending. Sure you are, honey. These are oversized pistons. You know what that means? It means the cylinders have been bored and the new pistons need to be larger to maintain proper clearance. The smile flickered. Well, that's right. But see, boring cylinders is precision work. You need a machine shop for that, and it's expensive. I know. I built my own boring bar. The clerk set down the list. You built your own boring bar. From scrap steel and an electric motor. Took me 6 weeks to get the tolerances right, but it works. Silence filled the space between them. Behind the clerk, another employee had stopped stocking shelves to listen. The clerk's voice went careful. Miss, I'm going to be honest with you. These parts run about $80. That's a lot of money to spend on a project that, well, that might not work out. Anna pulled 420s from her pocket. Money she'd earned cleaning the Petersons' barn after their hired man quit. Money she'd counted 3 times to make sure it was exact. The bills were crisp, smelling faintly of the tin box where she kept her savings. I'll take the parts. The clerk didn't move. Does your father know you're doing this? My father's dead. The words came out flat. The clerk's face did that thing. People's faces had been doing since November, shifting into pity, mixed with discomfort like grief was contagious and he might catch it if he wasn't careful. I'm sorry to hear that. But maybe you should talk to your brothers or an uncle or... I don't have brothers. And my uncles are in Iowa. Anna pushed the money across the counter. The parts. Please. The clerk looked at the money like it might bite him. Then he sighed and started writing up the order, his pen scratching across the carbon paper. These'll take 2 weeks to come in. You sure about this? I'm sure. Behind her someone laughed. Anna turned and saw 2 farmers she recognized from church, both watching with the kind of amusement men get when they think they're witnessing something absurd. One of them was shaking his head. She walked out with her receipt and the sound of their laughter following her through the door. The summer heat hit her like a wall, and she sat in her truck for 5 minutes before her hands stopped shaking. The machine shop visit in McCook went worse. Anna drove there with the Farmall's cylinder block loaded in the back of her pickup, wrapped in blankets like it was something precious. The shop sat on the industrial edge of town, corrugated metal building with oil stains in the gravel parking lot. Inside, the air tasted like cutting fluid and hot metal, sharp and bitter on her tongue. The owner came out of his office when the bell rang. 60 if he was a day, coveralls that had been blue, once hands scarred from decades of sharp edges. He looked at Anna like she was lost. Help you find someone, I need these cylinders honed. They've been bored oversized and they need a final finish. The owner walked to her truck, his boots crunching on gravel. He looked at the cylinder block, ran his finger along one of the bore marks. His nail caught on a rough spot. Who did the boring? I did. His eyebrows went up. You did? Yes, sir. He examined the cylinder more closely and Anna held her breath. She'd spent 8 weeks getting those bores right, measuring and remeasuring, adjusting the boring bar 1/1000th of an inch at a time. The owner pulled a micrometer from his pocket and checked the diameter, his movements practiced and precise. This is actually pretty good work. Little rough in places, but within spec. Anna felt something loosen in her chest. So, you'll hone them. The owner looked at her for a long moment. A truck passed on the highway, its Jake brake rattling. I would, but I don't work for women. The words hung there. Excuse me, insurance won't allow it. Too much liability. If you get hurt or if the work fails and someone gets injured, my policy doesn't cover that kind of situation. What kind of situation? Working for a female customer on equipment she's operating herself. Anna felt heat climbing up her neck. That's not a real policy. Maybe not. But it's my shop and those are my rules. The owner's voice went softer, which somehow made it worse. Look, I'm sure you're trying to honor your father's memory or something. That's real sweet. But this isn't work for women. You're going to get hurt, or you're going to waste a lot of money, or both. Best thing you can do is sell that block to someone who knows what they're doing. Anna loaded the cylinder block back into her truck without saying anything else. Her hands were shaking so hard she nearly dropped it. The blankets slipped and she had to readjust them twice. That night, Maggie came over and showed her how to hone cylinders by hand. 4 hours with a flex hone and penetrating oil, working each bore in a precise crosshatch pattern, checking measurements every 20 strokes. When they finished, Anna's arms felt like wet rope, and the barn smelled like kerosene and determination. Maggie cleaned her tools with diesel fuel, her movements efficient. You're going to run into this your whole life. Men who think machinery has a gender, and you're the wrong one. She packed her tool bag. The ones who say it to your face are almost easier than the ones who smile and pat your hand and call you honey while they're telling you no. How did you deal with it? Outlasted them. Maggie headed for her truck, and got good enough that they couldn't afford to say no. Church on Sunday became an exercise in public humiliation. Anna sat in the same pew she'd occupied her entire life, third row on the left, and heard the whispers that weren't quite whispers. Helen sat beside her with a face like stone, and Anna wondered which was worse, the women's pity or their judgment. The sanctuary smelled like furniture polish and old hymnals. Ruth Hayes slid into the pew beside them, just before the service started. 42 years old with steel gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Her husband farmed 800 acres north of town, and she'd been Helen's closest friend since the two families moved to the county within a year of each other. Ruth's hand found Helen's and squeezed. Behind them, Mrs. Patterson's voice carried, "It's unseemly is what it is, a young woman out there in a barn playing with tools like a man. What kind of Christian example is that?" Her daughter, Mrs. Palmer, made a sympathetic noise. "Helen's been through so much. First losing Tom, now this. You'd think Anna would show some consideration for her mother's feelings." Anna felt Helen stiffen beside her. Ruth's grip tightened. "I heard she's trying to rebuild Tom's old equipment. The poor dear doesn't understand how expensive that is. She'll bankrupt them both before she admits defeat. That's what happens when girls aren't raised properly. Tom let her spend too much time in that barn. Should have been teaching her to cook and sew and be a proper wife." The pastor began his sermon. Anna didn't hear a word of it. She sat there with her mother's hand cold in her lap and Ruth's presence solid on the other side, and she understood that this was how it would be. Every Sunday, every public space, every moment she chose to be visible. After the service, Bobby Wilson's mother cornered Helen by the coffee table. The room smelled like burned coffee and store-bought cookies. "My Bobby's been asking about Anna. He's got a good job at the grain elevator and he's ready to settle down. Maybe it would be good for her to have someone stable in her life." Helen's voice came out tight. "Anna's focused on other things right now. Well, she won't be young forever, and jobs like Bobby's don't grow on trees." Ruth appeared at Helen's elbow with 2 cups of coffee. "Speaking of jobs that don't grow on trees, I hear the grain elevator's been having trouble with their scale calibrations. Maybe Bobby should focus on keeping his current position before he starts thinking about marriage." Mrs. Wilson's face went red. She walked away without another word, her heels clicking on the linoleum. Helen looked at Ruth with something close to gratitude. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did." The pattern continued through fall and winter. Anna worked on the tractor in every spare moment, learning as she went. The bank refused her a small loan without a male co-signer. The feed store manager questioned every purchase. Men at the grain elevator treated her like she was playing dress-up in her father's life. Each rejection hurt. Each dismissal landed like a stone. But Anna kept working, kept learning, kept proving that broken was just another word for not fixed yet. Spring 1972 arrived with false hope and mud. The rebuild had taken 3 years exactly, every spare moment and every dollar Anna could scrape together. The engine sat assembled on its stand, beautiful and clean and ready. New pistons in honed cylinders, reground crankshaft, fresh bearings, rebuilt carburetor. The transmission had been apart and back together twice. Every electrical connection had been cleaned or replaced. Maggie stood in the barn examining the work with the critical eye of someone who knew exactly how many ways this could fail. "You did good work here." Anna's stomach was tight with anticipation and dread. "Think it'll start?" "Only one way to find out." Word had spread somehow. Anna didn't know how. Maybe Ruth had mentioned it. Maybe someone had seen the activity in the barn. By the time they were ready to try the first start, a small crowd had gathered in the yard. A dozen neighbors and farmers, all men except for Ruth and Maggie. They stood at a respectful distance, the way people stand when they're watching something that might be dangerous or might be ridiculous. Richard Garrett's dealership truck sat on the road, positioned where he could see but couldn't be accused of participating. Anna climbed onto the tractor seat. The metal was cold even through her jeans. She'd imagined this moment for 3 years, and now that it was here, her hands were shaking so hard she had to grip the steering wheel to steady them. The wheel felt familiar under her palms, worn smooth by someone else's labor. Maggie stood beside the tractor. Batteries charged, fuel's in the lines, timing's set, everything's ready. Anna reached for the starter button. Her finger touched the metal, and for a moment she couldn't push it. What if it didn't work? What if 3 years of learning and building and bleeding had been for nothing? What if everyone standing in her yard was right, and she was just a foolish girl playing at something she couldn't understand? Her father's voice, memory clear. Every broken machine is just a puzzle. You found all the pieces, Annie girl. Now put them together. She pushed the button. The starter motor cranked. The engine turned over once, twice, 3 times. Nothing. Cranked again. The sound of machinery trying and failing, trying and failing. Nothing. Anna kept her finger on the button until Maggie's hand covered hers. Stop. You'll flood it. The silence that followed felt like a physical weight. Anna sat on the tractor seat and heard someone in the crowd say exactly what she knew they'd say. Told you so. Richard Garrett's truck pulled away and she heard his horn honk twice. The sound that meant I was right and you were wrong and everyone knows it. The crowd dispersed. Some faces showed sympathy. Most showed satisfaction. Ruth stayed standing with Helen, who'd come out of the house when the crowd arrived. Maggie stayed too, already pulling tools from her bag. Anna sat on the tractor seat and cried. She tried to hold it in, tried to be strong, tried to be the person who could handle failure the way her father had handled setbacks. But 3 years of work and mockery and fighting just to exist in a world that didn't want her there crashed over her all at once. She climbed down and walked into the barn and put her face against the wall and sobbed. The wood smelled like dust and old paint, and she could feel the grain against her forehead. Maggie found her 20 minutes later. Timing's off. Anna didn't turn around. I checked it 3 times. Check it 4. Maggie's voice was gentle but firm. You're 10 degrees advanced. Set it back to 5 and it'll fire. How do you know? Because I've been listening to engines for 30 years and I know what a timing problem sounds like. Maggie came closer. Anna, look at me. Anna turned face, wet eyes burning. This isn't failure. This is part of the process. You think every engine starts the first time? You think every rebuild goes perfect? Everyone was watching. Let them watch. They'll be watching when it works too. They were laughing. Maggie's eyes went hard. Of course they were laughing. They've been waiting 3 years to see you fail. You think they'll stop laughing if you quit now? She gripped Anna's shoulder. Or do you think maybe, just maybe, they'll shut up when they hear that engine run? Anna wiped her face with her sleeve. 10 degrees. Back to 5. 2 hours of work tops. Maggie handed her a wrench. And Anna, when this starts, don't explain it to them. Don't apologize. Don't make yourself small. Just let them hear what they've been telling you was impossible. They worked through lunch and into the afternoon. Ruth brought sandwiches that neither of them ate. Helen watched from the kitchen window, and Anna wondered what her mother was thinking. The timing adjustment was finicky work, precision measured in degrees and fractions. Anna's hands were steady now, all the tears cried out, all the fear compressed into something harder. At 4 o'clock, with the sun starting its decline toward the horizon, Maggie stepped back. Try it now. Anna climbed onto the seat. No crowd this time, just Maggie and Ruth and Helen standing on the porch. The world felt smaller without witnesses, more honest. A meadowlark called from somewhere in the fields. She pushed the starter button. The engine cranked, turned over, coughed, and roared to life. The sound was rough at first, cylinders finding their rhythm after 17 years of silence. Then it smoothed out, that deep diesel rumble that meant power and purpose and everything working the way it was supposed to work. Anna sat on the tractor seat with tears streaming down her face again, but these were different tears. These were the kind that came when you'd been told something was impossible and you'd made it possible anyway. When you'd built something with your own hands and it worked. Maggie was grinning. Ruth had her hands over her mouth. And Helen stood on the porch with her apron pressed to her face, crying, and Anna couldn't tell if they were tears of relief or pride or fear or all 3 at once. Anna let the engine run, let it warm up and settle into its cadence. Then she put it in gear and drove it out of the barn into the spring sunlight. The tractor that hadn't run since Truman was president moved under its own power down the lane, and Anna drove it in a slow circle around the yard. When she came back, Helen was waiting. Her mother's voice came out broken. Your father would be so proud. Those 5 words, Anna would remember them for the rest of her life, because they meant Helen had finally seen what Anna was building. Not just a tractor, not just a farm, but a life that honored Thomas Brennan's legacy without being crushed by it. The reputation built slowly then, all at once. In the summer of 1973, Ruth's husband Jack needed his combine repaired. The dealer wanted $600 in 3 weeks. Anna looked at it on a Tuesday afternoon and had it running by Thursday, charging $200 for parts and labor. The smell of diesel and satisfaction. Jack told his brother. His brother told his neighbors. By fall, Anna had a waiting list. The work came in steady: tractors with electrical gremlins, combines with bearing problems, balers that wouldn't tie. She worked in her barn with tools she'd collected piece by piece, some bought, some built, some inherited. Every repair taught her something new. Every successful fix built her reputation a little higher. In 1975, a farmer from Curtis drove 60 miles to have Anna rebuild his tractor engine because 3 shops closer had failed. She did it in 2 weeks for half what they'd quoted. He paid cash and asked if she'd look at his planter. In 1978, men were driving from 3 counties away. Anna's barn had become something of a legend, the place you went when nobody else could fix it. She worked 10-hour days and still had more requests than she could handle. Helen's fear had transformed into something that looked like acceptance and maybe even pride. She kept the books, now tracking income and expenses, in the same careful handwriting she'd used for Thomas's farm records. The ledger smelled like ink and vindication. The farm crisis arrived like weather, first as distant warnings, then as something you couldn't escape. Interest rates spiked in 1980. Commodity prices crashed. Land values that had climbed through the 70s plummeted. Farmers who'd borrowed money to expand suddenly owed more than their land was worth, and the banks wanted their money. Anna watched it happen across the county. The Johnson farm went up for auction in 1982. 800 acres that had been in their family for 4 generations sold to pay debts. The Mitchell place followed 6 months later. Then the Stevenson farm, the same Stevenson who'd mocked her in the feed store. Every week brought another foreclosure notice, another equipment auction, another family loading their possessions into a truck and driving away from land their grandparents had broken with mules. Anna survived because she'd never borrowed. The Farmall M was old, but it worked. Her other equipment was older still, bought used and rebuilt by her own hands. No payments meant no pressure. No debt meant no bank could take what she'd built. By 1985, she had $42,000 in the bank. Money earned dollar by dollar through repair work and careful farming. Money that represented 16 years of saying no to new equipment and yes to making do. She drove past empty farms and felt guilty for surviving. The guilt tasted like copper. Richard Garrett came to her farm on a Tuesday evening in May 1985. Anna was in the barn rebuilding a neighbor's hydraulic pump when she heard the truck. She knew the sound of his engine, a newer Ford that he'd traded for every 3 years like clockwork. She didn't stop working. Garrett appeared in the barn door. He looked different, smaller somehow, though he hadn't actually shrunk. Gray hair where there'd been black, lines around his mouth that hadn't been there 16 years ago. He held his hat in his hands. "Miss Brennan." His voice had changed too. All the certainty had leaked out of it. Anna set down her wrench. "Mr. Garrett, I need to ask you something." She waited. Evening light slanted through the barn door behind him. "I've got 3 tractors sitting on my lot. Engine problems. My mechanics can't figure out what's wrong. The factory wants to charge me more than the tractors are worth." Anna wiped her hands on her work rag. "What kind of tractors?" "John Deere 4440S. Newer models. All 3 have the same symptoms. Loss of power. Black smoke won't hold RPM. Sounds like injection timing." Garrett's face showed surprise. "That's what I thought. But my boys insist it's something else." "Your boys are wrong." "How can you be sure?" "Because I've fixed that exact problem on 6 different 444Os in the past year." Anna pulled 3 shop manuals from her shelf. Deere changed the injection pump design in 1982. New pumps have a tendency to drift out of calibration if they sit too long between uses. She looked at him directly. "How long have those tractors been on your lot?" His face told her the answer before his mouth did. 8 months. There's your problem. Bring them over. I'll take a look. Garrett's hands twisted his hat. "How much do you charge?" "We'll figure it out." He stood there for a moment, and Anna could see him working through something. Then the words came out like they hurt. "They say you're the best in the county." "Who says that?" "Everyone. All the farmers. The ones who laughed at you. The ones who said you'd fail." Garrett's voice dropped. "The ones I told you'd fail." Anna picked her wrench back up. "Bring the tractors tomorrow. Early. Miss Brennan." She looked at him. "I was wrong about you. About everything." The words hung in the barn between them. Anna thought about that day at the auction. "Honey, you need your daddy to look at that first." She thought about 16 years of fighting to be taken seriously, of proving herself over and over to men who moved the goalposts every time she got close. "Yes, you were." Garrett flinched like she'd hit him. "I told people women couldn't farm. I told them you were wasting your time. I stood in my dealership and laughed about you with my customers." Anna set down her wrench again. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I can't sleep at night." Garrett's voice cracked. "I sold farmers' debt disguised as opportunity. I told them to expand to leverage to bet everything on growth. I made money on those sales. Good money. And now they're losing their farms, and I'm losing my dealership, and the only person in this county who's still standing is the woman I mocked for buying a $75 tractor." Anna felt something shift in her chest. Not forgiveness exactly, but understanding maybe. This man had been so certain of his own rightness, and the world had proven him wrong in ways he couldn't ignore. "That farm all you bought, is it still running every day? 16 years. Garrett shook his head slowly, and his eyes looked wet. $75. Best investment anyone in this county ever made. He left before Anna could respond. She stood in the barn and listened to his truck drive away, and she thought about her father. About Thomas Brennan, who'd taught her that land was the only thing that mattered, and debt was slavery, and patience was the only virtue that truly counted. Her hands found the farmall's steering wheel, worn smooth by her own grip over thousands of hours. The tractor that everyone had called junk. The machine that had taught her everything about persistence and faith, and the distance between what people said was impossible and what actually was. The barn door framed the sunset, and Anna stood there thinking about the farms that were empty now. The families that had lost everything. The weight of surviving when so many others hadn't. Tomorrow she'd fix Richard Garrett's tractors. She'd charge him fairly, and she wouldn't gloat. Because survival wasn't about being right. It was about being there at the end when the dust settled and the bills came due. And Anna Brennan was still there. October arrived in 1985 with frost warnings and the kind of clear skies that made work feel possible. Anna had developed a ritual over 16 years every fall before winter storage. The Farmall M got a complete inspection. Fluids changed, filters cleaned, every bolt, checked, every system tested. The tractor had given her 16 years of faithful service, and she repaid that loyalty with meticulous care. She was underneath checking for oil leaks when her flashlight caught something wrong. A hairline fracture running along the engine block where the crankcase met the main casting. Thin as a whisker but unmistakable. Anna traced it with her finger and felt her stomach drop. The metal was cold against her skin. Maggie came over that evening and confirmed what Anna already knew. The smell of autumn hung in the air, dry leaves, and the distant smoke of someone burning brush. That's going to spread. Maybe not this year, maybe not next, but eventually it'll open up and you'll lose compression. When that happens, the engine's done. Can it be welded? Maggie ran her thumb along the crack. Maybe. But cast iron, this old 50-50 chance the weld holds. Better odds finding a replacement block. Anna spent a week calling salvage yards from Nebraska to Iowa to Kansas. 1948 Farmall M blocks were rare enough that most places laughed when she described what she needed. The few that had possibilities wanted prices she couldn't justify. Finally, a yard in Salina quoted her $400 including shipping. She ordered it and decided to do something she'd never done in 16 years of ownership. Strip the original engine completely. Not just a rebuild, a total teardown to bare metal. Document everything. Understand every surface and seal. Maybe preserve the block as a teaching tool. Show her future students the difference between theory and practice. The work began on a Saturday morning with the kind of methodical care Anna had learned from Maggie. Every bolt labeled, every part photographed, every measurement recorded in a notebook that had become a technical diary spanning nearly 2 decades. The barn was quiet except for the clink of tools and the occasional call of crows outside. The cylinder head came off first, then the oil pan. Anna had done this work before, but always with the efficiency of someone making repairs. This time she was saying goodbye, and the difference showed in how her hands moved. She was removing the crankcase when her measurements started coming back wrong. The internal dimensions didn't match the external. 2 inches of space existed that shouldn't be there according to the factory specifications. Anna measured 3 more times, checking her math, trusting the numbers less than she trusted her confusion. Maggie arrived with lunch sandwiches from town still warm and found Anna sitting on the barn floor with a tape measure and a growing certainty that something was deliberately hidden. "Look at this." Anna showed her the measurements. "External depth is 10 inches. Internal clearance is only 8. Maggie examined the crankcase with the intensity of someone who'd spent decades learning that machines kept secrets. She tapped on the metal, listening to the sound. Someone added a false bottom. Welded it in so clean you'd never notice unless you stripped everything completely. Anna's hands were shaking as she found the cutting torch. The welds were old but professional, laid down by someone who knew what they were doing. She worked carefully, not wanting to damage whatever might be inside, and when the false panel finally came free, she had to sit down. The compartment was lined with oilcloth. Inside that, wrapped in a leather pouch sealed with wax, lay 3 items that would rewrite everything Anna thought she knew about her father. Money first. Old bills, nothing newer than 1951, counted out to exactly $3,200. The paper smelled like age and secrets and decisions made in desperation. A land deed next. 40 acres in Frontier County, dated 1949, made out to Thomas Brennan. Legal stamps and signatures that meant someone had owned property Anna never knew existed. And underneath both a letter, handwritten on paper that had yellowed around the edges, dated November 1952. Anna recognized her father's handwriting before she registered what the words meant. Her hands found the barn wall because her legs didn't want to hold her anymore. She slid down to the floor and started reading. "My dear Annie girl, if you're reading this, I'm gone and you found what I hid. Let me explain everything because you deserve the truth, even if it comes too late to change anything." In October 1951, the First National Bank of Curtis was robbed. 2 men with guns took $8,000 from the vault and disappeared westbound. The sheriff never caught them. What nobody knows is that I found the money. I was driving home from the feed store on Route 6 when I saw a truck broken down roadside. I stopped to help the way you do in the country. 2 men nervous and sweating. I didn't think much of it until I looked in the truck bed and saw a canvas bag. When I helped them push the truck aside, the bag split open. I saw the money. I saw the bank bands still wrapped around the stacks. They saw me see it. One of them pulled a gun. I thought my life was over. But then a car came around the bend, a family with children in the back seat. The men panicked. They grabbed what they could carry and ran into the fields, leaving the truck and me and about half the money. I should have called the sheriff right then. I know that now. But your mother was sick with pneumonia, and the doctor bills were piling up, and we were 2 months behind on everything. I thought God had answered my prayers in the only way he could. I took the money, $6,400 minus what they'd grabbed, hid it in our barn and didn't tell anyone, not even your mother. For months I couldn't spend $1 of it. Every bill felt like stealing twice, once from the bank, once from my own soul. Then I read in the paper that the 2 men had been caught in Wyoming with about $1,500 on them. The bank got partial recovery. Case closed. Nobody knew about the rest. Nobody knew about me. I still couldn't spend it on us, but I could do something that might make the wrong into something less wrong. There was a family in Frontier County named Henderson. Good people losing their farm after 3 bad years. The bank was going to foreclose on 40 acres they'd worked their whole lives. I bought the land through a lawyer in North Platte so nobody local would know. Paid cash. Put the deed in my name, but told the Hendersons they could stay as long as they wanted rent-free. They thought I was crazy or an angel. I was neither. I was just a man trying to make a terrible choice into something that might help someone. Anna stopped reading. Her father's voice filled her head so clearly it was like he was standing right there. She could see him at the kitchen table wrestling with this decision, carrying this weight. She started reading again. The rest of the money, $3,200, I hid in the tractor. Don't ask me why that machine. Maybe because it was Clarence Hollister's and he was the only friend I had who never judged me. Maybe because I knew I'd never drive it again after what I'd done. I sealed that engine in November 1952, told your mother I'd fix it come spring, but I never could bring myself to touch it. The guilt kept me away. Here's the part I need you to understand most. I told your mother everything. Not at first. I carried the secret alone for months, and it nearly killed me. But finally one night in our kitchen I broke down and confessed it all. I expected shame, anger, maybe divorce. Instead, your mother said something I'll never forget. You can't undo what's done, Tom, but you can use it for good. It was her idea to buy the Henderson land, her idea to help them. I wanted to turn myself in or burn the money or bury it somewhere and pretend I'd never found it. But Helen, your mother is stronger than I ever gave her credit for. She said we could make this right without destroying our family in the process. Every choice after that was both of us. The anonymous help we gave to families in trouble, the scholarship fund we started through the church, the times we paid someone's medical bills and never let them know where the money came from. That was your mother's wisdom, turning my sin into something that might balance the scales. When I sealed this tractor, Helen knew. When I told her I'd fix it next spring, she understood what I really meant, that I probably never would. She said, "One day Annie will need it, and when she finds this, she'll know what to do." Anna stopped again. Tears were running down her face now, and she didn't try to wipe them away. Her mother. Helen, who she'd fought with about farming, who she'd thought was weak for wanting her to give up. Helen, who had known about this secret for 16 years and never said a word. The letter continued, and Anna could see where the ink changed color, where the handwriting got shakier. I wrote these words in November 1952, the day I sealed this engine. I told myself I'd destroy this letter, but I never could. Now it's November 1968, 16 years later. I'm dying. The doctor says my heart won't last the week. I've reread this letter 100 times, trying to decide if I should burn it or leave it for you to find. In the end, I'm leaving it. Because you deserve to know who your parents really are. Not the stories people tell. The truth. The money is yours. The land deed is legal. The Hendersons are long gone, but the property is still there. Do with it what you think is right. But know this, Annie girl, the real treasure isn't in this compartment. It's the woman who raised you. Your mother has more strength in her smallest finger than I had in my whole body. She's the toughest farmer I ever knew, even though she never drove a tractor. She saved families I would have let suffer. She taught me that redemption isn't about erasing mistakes, it's about what you build after. 16 years this secret has waited. Now it's yours. Be strong like her. Be stubborn like me. Never let anyone tell you what you can't do. I love you more than I could ever say. Your father, Thomas Brennan. Anna sat on the barn floor with the letter in her hands and cried until she couldn't cry anymore. The afternoon light shifted across the floor, painting shadows that moved like memories. Then she stood up and walked to the house. Helen was in the kitchen making dinner. 60 years old now, hair completely gray, hands that still moved constantly but with the confidence of someone who'd outlasted her own fears. She looked up when Anna came in and her face changed. She read, Watch the memories flood back. She read. Watch the memories flood back. Watched 16 years of secret-keeping play across her features like weather. When Helen finished, she set the letter down carefully. "You found it." Her voice was steady. No surprise, no shock, just the tone of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. "You knew. All these years you knew." Helen's eyes met hers. "I knew about the money. I didn't know he'd written a letter." Anna pulled out the chair across from her mother and sat down hard. "He said it was your idea. The Henderson land, helping people, all of it." Helen's hands folded in her lap. "Your father wanted to turn himself in, or destroy the money. I convinced him there was a third option. Why didn't you tell me? Because it wasn't my secret to tell. It was his, and mine, and it needed to stay buried until you were old enough to understand what choices look like when all the options are bad." Anna felt something breaking open in her chest. "I spent 16 years thinking you wanted me to give up farming because you thought I was weak, because you didn't believe in me." Helen's face crumpled. "Oh, Annie, I fought you because I was terrified. Not because you couldn't do it, because I knew you could. And I knew what it would cost you. The loneliness, the fighting, the way people would treat you." She reached across the table. "I watched your father work himself to death on this land. I couldn't bear watching you do the same. I'm not Daddy." "No, you're stronger than he ever was." Helen's voice broke. "You're stronger than both of us. That's what scared me most." Anna looked at her mother, really looked at her for the first time in years, saw past the worry and the fear to the woman who'd carried a terrible secret for 16 years. The woman who'd turned theft into charity. The woman who'd told her husband that redemption was possible even when forgiveness wasn't. "He told me to seal the engine." Helen's words came slowly, like she was excavating them from deep memory. November 1952. "He wanted to destroy it, make sure nobody ever found what was hidden. But I told him no. I said, one day our daughter will need this. And when she finds it, she'll do the right thing." "Why were you so sure?" "Because you're our daughter. Both of us. His stubbornness and my practicality." Helen's hand found Anna's across the table. "I watched you fight this whole county for the right to farm. Watched you rebuild that tractor when everyone said it was impossible. Watched you build a life on your own terms." She gripped tighter. "If anyone could take something broken and make it into something good, it's you." They sat there in the kitchen while the light faded outside. Mother and daughter. Two women who'd misunderstood each other for years because they'd both been protecting secrets too heavy to carry alone. Anna's voice came out rough. "I thought you didn't believe in me. I believed in you so much it terrified me." Helen was crying now too. "Every night I prayed you'd prove me wrong, and you did. Every single day you did." Anna came around the table and put her arms around her mother. They held each other while 16 years of miscommunication dissolved into something clearer, something that felt like understanding. The kitchen clock ticked. Outside, the first stars appeared. Ruth Hayes appeared at the door the next morning, drawn by the kind of intuition that comes from decades of friendship. Anna told her everything, the discovery, the letter, Helen's role. Ruth listened without interrupting, and when Anna finished, she said what needed to be said. "Your mother saved more families than anyone in this county knows, and she did it without anyone seeing. That's the kind of strength that matters," Ruth added. "The kind nobody applauds." The next week, Anna sat down with the money and the deed and made her decisions. The kitchen table was covered with papers and calculations and possibilities. The cash went into a separate account at a bank in Grand Island where nobody knew her family's history. She named it the Dawson County Women Farmers Relief Fund and structured it to provide small grants and zero-interest loans to young women trying to start farming operations. The attorney she hired looked at her like she was crazy. "You're giving this away, I'm passing it forward. The same way someone once passed it to my family. By 1995, that $3,200 had helped 18 women buy equipment, lease land, and build operations that banks wouldn't finance. The fund grew through Anna's own contributions and occasional anonymous donations from farmers who remembered what it felt like to need help and not get it. The land deed required more work. Anna drove to Frontier County and found the 40 acres exactly where the 1949 document said they'd be. Good bottom land currently leased to a corporate farming operation that had absorbed a dozen family farms in the area. The title search took 3 months. The Hendersons were gone. The last of them died in 1977. Thomas Brennan's estate had never probated the land because nobody knew it existed. In January 1986, a county judge transferred the deed to Anna as the sole heir and finder of the original document. She sold 20 acres to a young woman named Emily Henderson, no relation to the original family, but the symmetry felt right. Emily was 28, fresh out of agricultural school, and couldn't get bank financing because she was female and single and had more education than most loan officers thought was proper for someone who wanted to work dirt. Anna sold her the land at half market value with owner financing at 2% interest. Emily stood in Anna's kitchen with the purchase agreement and cried, "Why are you doing this?" "Because someone once did something similar for people who needed help, and because farming needs more women who aren't afraid to get their hands dirty." The other 20 acres went to a young farmer from Kansas named Jacob Whitmore, 24 years old with a family history of farming and no family farm left. His parents had lost everything in the crisis. He reminded Anna of herself at that age, all determination and no resources, all future and no present. She sold him the land on the same terms as Emily, half price, owner financing, a chance. Jacob looked at the contract like it was written in a foreign language. "Miss Brennan, I don't understand. You could get twice this price. I could. But then you'd be in debt for the next 20 years, and I've seen what debt does to farmers." Anna handed him a pen. "Make the land work. Pay me back when you can. Help someone else when you're able. That's the only interest I'm charging." April 1989 arrived with the kind of weather that made people believe in new beginnings. Anna stood in the same auction lot where she'd bought the Farmall M 20 years earlier. Different auctioneer, different crowd, but the same dusty lot where farmers came to buy and sell the tools of their survival. The Farmall sat among her other equipment like a patriarch among grandchildren. 41 years old now. The welded crack in the block had held, but Anna knew it was living on borrowed time. She'd found a newer tractor for her operation, a 1965 model with more power and modern hydraulics. The farm had grown to 120 acres. She needed equipment that matched her ambition. But the Farmall had served faithfully for 20 years. It deserved better than being left in a barn to rust. It deserved an owner who would appreciate what it represented. The auction crowd was larger than she'd expected. Word had spread about the legendary tractor, the one that hadn't run for 17 years until a 22-year-old woman rebuilt it in a barn, the one that had become a symbol of something larger than machinery. Richard Garrett stood at the edge of the crowd. 68 years old, retired, his dealership sold to a regional chain. He'd aged into something that looked like humility. Anna caught his eye and nodded. He nodded back. Ruth Hayes stood beside Helen near the front, both women watching with the kind of pride that came from knowing the whole story. The auctioneer was good at his job. "Folks, we've got something special here. 1948 Farmall M purchased at this very auction in 1969 for $75 by Miss Anna Brennan. Completely rebuilt. Running continuously for 20 years. Documented maintenance history. One owner since restoration." He paused for effect, letting the story sink in. The crowd was silent, listening. "Miss Brennan has set a reserve of $5,000. Do I hear 5,000 hands went up across the crowd? Collectors, farmers, history enthusiasts, people who understood that some machines carried stories worth more than their metal. The bidding climbed quickly. 6,000, 7, 8. Faces Anna recognized from 20 years of mockery were now competing to own a piece of what they'd once called impossible. At $12,000, only two bidders remained, a collector from Lincoln and a young woman standing near the front. The woman looked familiar in the way people do when they remind you of yourself at a different age. Mid-20s, work clothes, hands that showed labor, standing with the kind of determination Anna recognized from mirrors. 12.5, the collector from Lincoln. The young woman's voice came clear. 13,000. The collector hesitated, then shook his head. The auctioneer's gavel came down. Sold for $13,000 to the young lady. Anna watched the buyer approach. Up close, she was younger than Anna had thought. 26, maybe. Blonde hair pulled back, eyes that had seen disappointment but hadn't quit yet. Miss Brennan, Laura Beth Carson, from Iowa. They shook hands. Laura's grip was strong. I've been following your story for 5 years. Ever since I told my father I wanted to farm, and he said women couldn't handle machinery. Anna felt something shift in her chest. What did you do? Proved him wrong. Bought my own equipment. Leased 40 acres. Made a profit my first year. Laura looked at the tractor. This will sit in my barn and remind me that the only limits that matter are the ones we accept. Anna felt tears threatening and blinked them back. Then it's yours for exactly the right reason. They loaded the farm all onto Laura's trailer together. Other farmers helped, and Anna noticed how they talked to Laura. Respectful, direct, the way they'd learned to talk to Anna over 2 decades of being proven wrong. When the trailer pulled away, Anna stood there watching a piece of her history disappear down the highway. Richard Garrett walked over. $13,000 for a tractor you paid $75,000 for. That's right. Garrett was quiet for a moment. The lot was emptying around them. I need to tell you something I should have said 20 years ago. You already apologized, Mr. Garrett. I apologized for being wrong, but I never apologized for what being wrong cost you. Garrett's voice went rough. I spent 20 years telling people women couldn't farm. I influenced bankers and suppliers and other farmers. I made your life harder every day because I couldn't admit that my understanding of the world was too small. Anna looked at this man who'd been so certain of his own rightness. We all start with small understandings. The question is whether we let them grow. Garrett's eyes were wet. You're a better person than I deserve. I'm just someone who learned that proving people wrong isn't about them. It's about proving something to yourself. They stood there in the afternoon sun, and Garrett extended his hand. Anna took it. The handshake was firm and final, the kind that closes chapters. You ever wonder why that engine was sealed so carefully? Garrett's question surprised her. I know why now. Care to share? Anna smiled. Buy me coffee sometime. I'll tell you about Thomas and Helen Brennan and the distance between mistakes and redemption. The years moved forward the way years do. Anna kept farming, kept fixing equipment, kept proving that survival was about showing up every day with your hands ready. The Brennan farm became a landmark in the county, the place where a woman had once fought the whole world and won. Helen died in 2010 at 85 years old. Her funeral filled the Methodist Church with people who remembered her as the woman who'd quietly held a family together through grief and secrets and the slow building of something better. Anna stood at the front and told the truth that her mother had been the strongest farmer she'd ever known, even though she'd never driven a tractor. Ruth Hayes spoke at the service too, her voice clear despite her own age. Helen Brennan taught us all that strength isn't always visible. Sometimes the strongest people are the ones nobody sees. The Women Farmers Relief Fund continued to grow. By 2020, it had helped over 60 women start operations across 3 states. Some succeeded, some failed, but they all got the chance that banks had refused them. Anna attended some of their farm dedications, standing quietly in the back, watching new generations build what she'd once fought for alone. The land in Frontier County stayed productive. Emily Henderson built a thriving organic operation and eventually bought another 80 acres adjacent to her original 20. She married another farmer, had 2 daughters, taught them both to drive tractors before they turned 10. Jacob Whitmore married, had 3 kids, and passed his land to his daughter, who studied agricultural engineering and came back to farm with drones and soil sensors and the same dirt her father had learned on. He named his farm Brennan Fields in honor of the woman who'd given him a chance. The 1948 Farmall M ended up in a museum in Des Moines, still running, still carrying its story. A placard explained the basics. Purchased 1969 for $75. Rebuilt by Anna Brennan over 3 years. Sold 1989 for $13,000. But the real story lived in the details too small for museum walls, in the hands that had learned to be gentle with stubborn machinery, and the patience that had outlasted mockery, and the faith that broken was just another word for not fixed yet. Anna turned 78 in March 2025. She'd scaled back her farming to a few acres of corn and a garden that fed her and half the county. Her hands showed every year and every wrench. Her back complained in weather. But she still woke up thinking about what needed doing, and that felt like enough. Her granddaughter came to visit on a Saturday in April. Josephine Josie, to everyone who knew her, was 16 years old and currently fighting with her parents about what career made sense for a girl with mechanical aptitude and no interest in sitting behind a desk. They were in the barn when Josie asked the question that had been building. "Grandma, kids at school say girls can't be mechanics. They say it's a boy's job." Anna was teaching her how to rebuild a carburetor from a neighbor's lawnmower. Simple work, foundation stuff. She set down her screwdriver. "Let me tell you about a 1948 Farmall M." She told the whole story. The auction and the mockery and the 3 years of learning, the pattern of rejection and the moment the engine started. Richard Garrett's apology and the hidden compartment. The letter from Thomas and the revelation about Helen. The land passed forward and the fund that still helped women farm. Josie listened with the intensity of someone hearing their own future described. Great-Grandma Helen knew all along. She knew, and she was stronger than anyone understood. Anna looked at her granddaughter. "People will tell you what you can't do for the rest of your life. They'll have reasons that sound reasonable. They'll use words like practical and realistic and appropriate." Her hands found the carburetor again. "None of that matters. What matters is whether you believe them." "I don't want to believe them." "Then don't. Build something they say is impossible. And when it works, don't gloat. Just let them hear the engine run." Josie picked up her own screwdriver and they worked together in the barn, where 3 generations of women had learned that broken was just another word for not fixed yet. Outside, the Nebraska wind moved across fields that had been farmed by Brennan hands for 90 years. The land didn't care about debt or gender or what anyone thought was possible. It just waited for someone to show up with their hands ready. Anna thought about her father and the choice he'd made in desperation, about her mother and the wisdom that had turned theft into charity, about the tractor that had taught her everything about persistence, about the women who'd taken chances on land she'd passed forward, about Laura Beth Carson driving that Farmall through Iowa with a story that proved something larger than machinery. Ruth Hayes stopped by that evening, bringing pie the way she'd been doing for 50 years. They sat on the porch watching the sun go down, 2 old women who'd survived everything the world had thrown at them. "You did good, Anna." Ruth's voice was soft. Helen would be proud. Anna thought about her mother's face that day in the kitchen when the letter came to light, about the revelation that Helen had been the architect of redemption all along. She already was proud. I just didn't know it. They sat in comfortable silence, and Anna understood that this was the real treasure, not money or land or legendary tractors, but the knowledge that 3 generations of women had fought to make the world a little bit bigger for the ones who came after. In the end, it had never been about the $75 or the $13,000 or even the $3,200 hidden in an engine block. It had been about believing in something when everyone else said it was worthless. That was a lesson worth more than any treasure, and the only one that really mattered was whether you passed it on. The sun dropped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Somewhere in the fields, a tractor engine rumbled to life, the sound of someone starting their work, the sound of someone refusing to quit, the sound of someone proving that impossible is just a word people use when they're not brave enough to try.